Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Whisper Zone. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. The first time I heard my dead wife's voice calling from the frozen woods, I thought I was losing my mind. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare that would change my life forever in the boundary waters of Minnesota. My name is Marcus O'Connor, and I've been a ranger here in Superior National Forest for the past 2 years. Most people come here to escape into nature's beauty. I came here to escape my memories. That morning started like any other November day, bitter cold and quiet as grave. The thermometer outside my cabin window showed 20 degrees C, and the sun was just a pale ghost hiding behind gray clouds. As I sipped my coffee, I watched snow falling silently through the ancient pines. Some of these trees have been standing here for over 300 years, their branches now heavy with fresh snow. Being alone in the wilderness doesn't bother me much. My time as a Marine Corps scout sniper taught me how to embrace solitude. And after losing Sarah to cancer, being alone felt easier than being around people with their sad eyes and worried questions. Out here, with nothing but miles of forest and frozen lakes for company, I could pretend the hole in my heart wasn't getting bigger every day. But something felt different that morning. Wrong, the animals were too quiet. Even the winter birds, usually chattering away in the treetops, were silent. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, the same way it used to in Afghanistan when trouble was coming. I pulled on my heavy winter gear, thick wool socks, insulated, boots, layered clothing, and my trusty ranger jacket. The weight of my rescue pack felt comforting as I stepped out onto my cabin's porch. The cold hit my face like a slap, making my eyes water. The forest stretched out before me, a maze of white and dark green. The lakes were starting to freeze over, sheets of ice creeping from the shores toward the center. In a few weeks, they'd be solid enough for ice fishing. But right now, they looked like dark mirrors reflecting the heavy sky. That's when I saw, in me, the first sign that this wasn't going to be a normal day. About 50 yards from my cabin, the snow had formed strange patterns. Not the usual drifts shaped by wind, but perfect circles, like something had been drawing in the snow. As I got closer, I noticed how the morning light caught them, making them sparkle like diamonds. But there was something else too, a faint red tinge in the center of each circle that made my stomach turn. I reached down and brushed away some of the fresh snow. Underneath, the ice was stained pink, blood, fresh enough that it hadn't turned brown yet. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Ranger O'Connor, come in." It was Linda from dispatch, her voice tense. "We've got reports of 3 missing ice fishermen from the north side of Basswood Lake. Family says they haven't checked in since yesterday afternoon." I keyed the radio. "Copy that. I'll head up there now." As I turned to get my snowmobile ready, something caught my eye. High up, in one of the old pines, something dark was moving. Just for a second, I thought I saw a shape. Too big to be a bear, too strange to be anything I recognized. But when I looked again, there was nothing there except snow falling from disturbed branches. I should have known then. Should have remembered. The stories the Ojibwe elders tell about these woods in winter. About the ancient things that wake up when the hunger moon rises. About the spirits that can wear your loved ones' voices like a mask. But I didn't know then. I was still thinking, like a ranger, like a former Marine, like a man of facts and reason. I was about to learn how little those things matter when something old and hungry decides to hunt. The snowmobile's engine echoed through the silent forest as I made my way to Basswood Lake. Fresh snow had covered most tracks, but I've spent enough time in these woods to notice things others might miss. Broken branches, disturbed snow, little signs that tell big stories. I found their truck first, parked at the winter access point. 3 sets of footprints led toward the lake, dragging ice fishing gear. Normal so far. but something made me stop and look closer at the truck. The windows were frosted over, but not in the usual way. The ice patterns looked like handprints. Huge handprints, bigger than any human's. Just ice, I muttered to myself. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. The lake stretched out before me, a vast white plain under the gray sky. The fisherman's gear was still there, 3 holes drilled through the ice in a triangle. Pattern. But something was wrong with how their equipment was arranged. Their fishing rods weren't just dropped or abandoned. They were stuck in the ice standing straight up, pointing at the sky like arrows, or like markers. I knelt down to examine one of the holes. The ice around it was thick, at least 12 inches, safe for fishing. But the edges were rough, like something had clawed its way up through it rather than being drilled. And there was that same pinkish tinge I'd seen earlier. My radio crackled. Through the static, I heard what sounded like singing. A soft, sad tune I recognized, Sarah's favorite lullaby. My hand shook as I adjusted the dial, but the sound was gone. Get it together, Marcus, I told myself. Focus on the job. That's when I noticed the tracks leading away from the fishing holes. They weren't boot prints anymore. They were different, deeper, wider, like something very heavy had walked here. And they led into the dense forest on the far shore. I followed the tracks, keeping my hand near the bear spray on my belt. Not that it would help much in this cold, but its weight was comforting. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches heavy with snow creating tunnels of white and shadow. After about half a mile, I came to a clearing. What I saw there made my blood run cold. The trees around the clearing had strange marks carved into their trunks, deep gouges that seemed to form patterns. Not random claw marks, but deliberate symbols. And they were bleeding. Not sap, but actual. Red blood freezing as it dripped down the bark. In the center of the clearing stood an old man in traditional Ojibwe clothing. I recognized him as Joe Two Rivers, one of the tribal elders. He was looking up at something in the trees, shaking, his head slowly. "Was wondering when you'd show up, Ranger," he said without turning around. "Was hoping it wouldn't be this winter, but the signs have been there." "What signs, Joe?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on here?" He turned to, face me, his eyes heavy with worry. "Your people call this place the Boundary Waters because it's where 2 lands meet. But it's not just water and shore that meet here. In the deep winter, when the hunger moon rises, other boundaries get thin. 2, between your world and theirs. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but those symbols in the trees, the blood that shouldn't be there, the strange tracks, they demanded answers my ranger training couldn't provide." "The fishermen," I said. "Did you find any sign of them?" Joe pointed up. I followed his gesture and immediately wished I hadn't. High up in the branches, barely visible through the snow, was what looked like a cocoon made of ice. And inside, I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is O'Connor. We're going to need search and rescue at my location. And the coroner." What I didn't say was that the body in the ice cocoon wasn't whole anymore. Something had been feeding on it. Something that liked its meat frozen. "They won't find the other 2, Joe said quietly. "Not yet. It likes to save its food, and it's hungry after sleeping so long." "What's hungry, Joe? What did this?" He looked at me with ancient sadness in his eyes. "The Wendigo, the hunger spirit. It wakes up in the coldest winters when the moon is right, and it changes things, changes people, makes them hungry too." I was about to ask more questions when we heard it. A woman's voice, calling from deeper in the woods, calling my name, Sarah's voice. Joe grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Don't answer it, Ranger. No matter what you hear, no matter whose voice it uses, that's how it lures you in. That's how the hunger spreads." The voice called again, closer now. And with it came a blast of Arctic air that froze the tears on my cheeks and made the trees crack with cold. The temperature must have dropped 20 degrees in seconds. "Go back to your cabin," Joe said urgently. "Put cedar smoke at your doors and windows. Don't go out at night, no matter what you hear." And if you see anything strange in the snow, anything at all, don't follow it. The Wendigo. It likes to play with its food first. I wanted to argue, to say this was crazy talk, but the half-eaten body in the ice above us, the impossible cold, and Sarah's voice calling from a forest where she'd never walked, they told a different story, a horror story that was somehow, impossibly, real. As if to emphasize the point, a sound echoed through the trees. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something in between. Something that made every survival instinct I had scream at me to run. Instead, I stood my ground. These were my woods, my responsibility. And somewhere out there, 2 people might still be alive. I just hoped I could find them before they became something else entirely. The walk back to my snowmobile felt longer than it should have. Every shadow between the trees looked wrong, and the cold had gotten so bad my breath froze in my beard. But what really bothered me was the silence. No birds, no wind, nothing. I kept thinking about what Joe had said about the Wendigo. In all my years as a ranger, I'd heard plenty of stories about strange things in these woods, but I'd always trusted what I could see and touch. Now, looking at the bloody symbols in the trees and remembering that ice cocoon, I wasn't so sure anymore. The sun was setting when I got back to my cabin. First thing I did was radio in about the body we'd found, careful to stick to the facts I could explain. I didn't mention Joe's warnings or the impossible voice I'd heard. They already thought I was a bit strange, living out here alone after Sarah died. I was making coffee when I heard it again. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice coming from just outside my window. "Marcus, I'm so cold. Please let me in." My hands shook so bad I dropped the coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, but I barely noticed. Because that voice, it sounded exactly like her, the way she'd say my name when she was tired after a long day at the hospital. The little catch in her throat. "You're not real," I whispered. But I found myself walking to the window anyway. Through the frosted glass, I saw a figure standing in the snow. It looked like Sarah at first, her height, her dark hair. But as I got closer to the window, the shape changed, stretched, grew taller. The thing that wasn't Sarah turned its head, and I stumbled backward. Its face, God, its face. Gray skin pulled tight over bones, antlers rising from its skull like dead trees, and its eyes. They glowed like Arctic ice, ancient and hungry. I blinked and it was gone. But it left something behind, frost patterns on my window spreading like spider webs. Inside the patterns, I could make out tiny scenes. People running, people falling, people changing. My radio came to life with a burst of static. Through the noise, I heard voices, lots of voices. Some calling for help, some screaming, some singing Sarah's lullaby. I yanked out the batteries, but the voices kept coming for a few seconds before fading away. I needed to think, to plan. I was a Marine, trained to handle impossible situations, but all my training hadn't prepared me for this. I remembered Joe's advice and grabbed the cedar branches I kept for campfires. Soon, sweet-smelling smoke filled the cabin. Whether it would actually help or not, just doing something made me feel better. That's when I heard the scream. It came from the direction of the lake, high and desperate. A human scream. Someone's still alive out there. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, rope, first aid kit, flare gun. Stopped at the door, remembering Joe's warning about going out at night. But I'm a ranger. Helping people in trouble is my job. The moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a physical force. The thermometer read 40 degrees now, way too cold for this time of year. The northern lights had come out, painting the sky in sheets of green and purple that made the snow glow in strange colors. I followed the sound of movement through the trees, my flashlight beam bouncing off snow-covered branches. The tracks I was following kept changing. Sometimes boot prints, sometimes those huge deep marks I'd seen before. The trees opened up into another clearing, and I saw him. A man hanging upside down from a tree branch about 20 feet up. He was still moving. "Hold on," I called out. "I'm coming to help." I got closer and saw it was Thomas Wright, one of the missing fishermen. He was conscious, staring at me with wide eyes. "Cut me down," he whispered. "Please, before it comes back." I started climbing the tree, trying not to think about what it might be. When I got close enough, I saw how he was hanging. Ice had grown around his legs like crystal ropes, holding him in place. The ice was pink with blood. As I worked to free him with my knife, Thomas kept talking, his words coming fast and shaky. It looked like my brother at first, Danny. But Danny's been dead for 10 years. I knew it couldn't be him, but I followed anyway. Then it changed, got big, so big, and the hunger. He stopped, shuddering. I can feel it in my head. It's hunger, it's like a song I can't stop hearing. The ice finally cracked. I caught Thomas as he fell, helping him down from the tree. His skin felt too cold, even through my gloves. "The others?" I asked. "Jake's dead, I saw it eating." He stopped, gagging. "Don't know about Mike. It took him somewhere else, into the caves under the lake. I got him back to my cabin, wrapped him in blankets, gave him hot tea. His color wasn't good, skin pale and slightly gray, eyes glassy with fever. When he thought I wasn't looking, he kept licking his lips and staring at my throat. I tried calling for emergency evacuation, but the radio was dead. Just static and those horrible voices. We were on our own. Outside, the northern lights had gotten brighter, casting shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. And in those shadows, something huge was moving through my woods. The Wendigo was hunting. And somehow I knew it was watching us through my windows, trying to decide which one of us to take first. Something was wrong with Thomas. I noticed it first when he wouldn't touch the hot soup I made him. He just sat there, staring at it like he'd never seen food before. "You need to eat," I told him. "Get your strength back." He looked up at me and his eyes had changed. The brown was fading, turning pale blue like ice. "Not hungry," he said. "Not for that." I pretended to check the radio again while watching him in the reflection of my window. He was scratching his arms now, hard enough to leave marks. His skin had a grayish tint that wasn't just from the cold. "The voices," he whispered. "Can you hear them? They're so hungry." I heard them all right. The radio was still dead, but voices kept coming through anyway. Some begging for help, others laughing. And always, somewhere in the mix, Sarah singing that lullaby. The temperature inside the cabin was dropping, even though the fire was roaring. Frost was creeping up the walls, making those strange pictures again. People running, hunting, eating. "Tell me about the caves," I said, trying to keep Thomas talking. Keep him human. "The ones under the lake. Where did you see them?" He shuddered. "Through the ice. There's a whole world down there. Old, dark, full of..." He stopped, gagging. When he looked up again, his teeth looked sharper. "We shouldn't talk about it. It can hear us." "What can hear us, Thomas?" "The old one. The first one. The one that's been here since before the trees." He stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair. "I need meat, raw meat, please. It hurts so much." I backed away slowly, remembering what Joe had said about how the hunger spreads. "Thomas, fight it. Whatever's happening to you, you have to fight." He laughed, but it didn't sound human anymore. "Fight it? You can't fight hunger. Hunger always wins." That's when all the animals started running. I heard them first, hundreds of feet pounding through the snow. When I looked out the window, I saw deer and wolves running together, not even noticing each other. Birds filled the sky, flying south in the darkness. Even the mice were fleeing, streaming out of the walls of my cabin. They were all running from something, or towards something. Thomas pressed his face against the window, his breath freezing instantly on the glass. "The old one is calling them, calling us. There's going to be a feast." I grabbed my rifle, but Thomas moved faster than any human should. He knocked the gun from my hands and grabbed my throat. His skin was cold as ice. "You don't understand," he said, and his voice echoed like it was coming from somewhere deep underground. "The hunger. It's not just about eating. It's about becoming, changing, growing." I broke free and ran for the door. Behind me, Thomas screamed, not in anger, but in pain. When I looked back, he was changing. His joints were cracking, bones stretching, skin turning gray and tight. Antlers were pushing through his scalp, small ones but growing fast. I got outside just as he burst through my cabin wall. He was 8 feet tall now, his clothes torn, his new antlers scraping the doorframe. But his eyes were the worst part. They glowed with that same ancient hunger I'd seen before. He wasn't Thomas anymore. He was becoming a Wendigo. The northern lights above us turned blood red, painting the snow crimson. All around us the forest was alive with movement. Dark shapes flitted between the trees, some walking upright, some crawling, all of them hungry. My radio crackled to life one last time, but instead of Sarah's voice, I heard Mike, the last missing fisherman. "Help!" he screamed through the static. "I'm under the ice, in the caves. Oh God, I can see them all down here. All the ones they've taken, they're changing, they're... His voice cut off in a wet gurgle. The thing that used to be Thomas tilted back its head and howled. The sound echoed off the trees, off the ice, off the sky itself, and from all around us other howls answered. They were coming, all of them, and they were all so very, very hungry. I ran for my snowmobile, my thoughts racing. The caves under the lake, that's where this all started. That's where the old one, the first Wendigo, slept. And that's where Mike still might be alive. But as I reached the snowmobile, I saw something in the snow that made my blood freeze. Footprints. Sarah's footprints. The ones I'd know anywhere, leading toward the lake. Part of me knew it was a trap. The Wendigo was using her image, her voice, to lure me in. But another part wondered if there was something of her out there in the darkness. Something I could save. Behind me, Thomas's transformed shape crashed through the trees, leading a pack of darker, hungrier shapes. Above me, the northern lights blazed like a fire in the sky. And ahead of me, Sarah's footprints led to the lake where something ancient and evil had made its nest. I had a choice to make, and I knew, whatever I chose, this night was far from... Through my hands tightened on the snowmobile's handlebars. First things first, I had to get to the lake, had to find those caves. Had to end this one way or another. I gunned the engine and took off into the night, the howls of the hunting pack following close behind. The wind stung my face, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the hunger. It was in the air now, in the ground, in my bones. And it was growing. The snowmobile's headlight cut through the darkness as I raced across the frozen lake. Behind me, I could hear them coming. The sound of too many feet on ice, the hungry breathing, the inhuman cries. The thing that used to be Thomas was leading. Them, his new antlers gleaming red in the strange light from above. I knew the lake's surface like the back of my hand, every crack, every thin spot. But tonight was different. The ice was changing, forming patterns I'd never seen before. In some places it was crystal clear, and I could see things moving in the water below. That's when I saw Mike. He was pressed up against the underside of the ice, his face frozen in terror. His hands were changed, longer fingers, gray skin. But his eyes were still human, and they were begging for help. I hit the brakes and the snowmobile slid sideways. The ice beneath me cracked. Not the normal sound of winter ice, but something deeper, like a giant waking up. "Hold on, Mike," I shouted, grabbing the rope from my pack. "I'm coming." I should have known better. Should have remembered Joe's warnings. Because when I got closer, I saw Mike's mouth moving. He was trying to say something. Run. The ice exploded. Something huge burst up through the surface, sending me and the snowmobile flying. I landed hard, rolling away from the jagged hole. Water sprayed up into the freezing air, turning instantly to ice crystals. It rose from the water, like a mountain coming to life. 15 feet tall at least, with antlers like ancient tree branches dripping with old blood and worse things. Its skin was the color of a week-old corpse, stretched so tight over its bones that I could see every ridge and hollow. The first Wendigo, the old one. The thing that had been waiting down there in the dark, growing stronger with every person it took. When it opened its mouth, I saw row after row of icicle teeth. and when it screamed, I saw everyone it had ever eaten reflected in its eyes. I scrambled backward, but the ice was breaking up all around me now. Dark water bubbled up through the cracks, and in that water things were moving. Pale shapes with hungry eyes, reaching up with long gray fingers. Marcus, Sarah's voice, coming from the Wendigo's mouth. Marcus, don't you want to be with me? Don't you want to stop being alone? The worst part was, for a second, I did. The hunger was in me now, too. Not just for food, but for everything I'd lost. For Sarah, for peace, for an end to being alone. Then I remembered what Sarah had told me before she died. Live, Marcus. Promise me you'll live. The flare gun. I had the flare gun, but before I could reach it, Thomas caught up to me. He was fully changed now, 9 feet tall and horrible. He grabbed me with hands like ice and lifted me off the ground. Join us, he said. But it wasn't just his voice. It was the voices of everyone the hunger had taken. The feast is beginning. That's when I noticed something. A smell coming up through the broken ice. Not just lake water, something else, something like gas. Methane, bubbling up from the lake bottom. I had one chance. One crazy, impossible chance. I kicked hard, breaking Thomas's grip, and rolled across the ice. My hands were so cold I could barely feel the flare gun, but I grabbed it anyway. Behind me, the first Wendigo roared, a sound that shook snow from the distant trees. Sarah, I whispered, I'm sorry. I fired the flare straight down into the biggest crack in the ice. For a second, nothing happened. Then the world turned to fire. The methane exploded, turning the lake into a sheet of flame. The ice shattered like glass. I felt myself falling, down into the dark water where all the hungry things lived. The last thing I saw before I went under was the first Wendigo burning, its ancient flesh finally meeting something hotter than its hunger. Then there was only cold, and dark, and the deep. I don't remember much after that. The cold took most of my memories, along with 3 of my fingers and part of my left ear. They found me 2 days later, half frozen on the shore. The lake had refrozen, smooth and innocent, as a mirror. There was no sign of the Wendigos, no proof of what had happened except for the strange burn marks in the ice. The official report says there was a methane explosion. Says the missing people fell through the ice and drowned. Simple, clean, logical. But sometimes on the coldest nights when the hunger moon rises, I hear things in the wind. Voices calling. Footsteps in the snow that change shape when you look at them too long. And sometimes when the northern lights paint the sky in colors that shouldn't exist, I think about what's down there, under the ice, under the lake, waiting, getting hungry. Again, that was 5 winters ago. I don't work as a ranger anymore, can't with my missing fingers and the way cold weather makes my bones ache. The doctors called it severe frostbite. They had neat, simple explanations for everything that happened to me, but they can't explain why I wake up some nights, hearing Sarah's lullaby in the wind. They can't explain why I keep my windows sealed with cedar smoke, or why I never eat meat in winter anymore. And they definitely can't explain the letters I get from Joe Two Rivers every November, always saying the same thing. The ice is getting thinner. They're getting hungry again. I live in Arizona now, where the sun bakes the desert, and snow is something that happens to other people. But every year when the hunger moon rises, I check the news from Superior National Forest. Missing hikers, strange ice formations, animal migrations that don't make sense. I should warn people, should tell them what's really out there in those ancient woods. But who would believe me? Who would believe that something older than the trees sleeps under the lake, dreaming cold dreams and waiting for the ice to thicken? Sometimes I get letters from Thomas's family, asking if I've heard anything new about what happened to him. I never know what to say. How do you tell someone that their loved one turned into something else? Something hungry? The dreams are the worst part. In them, I'm back under the ice, but I'm not alone. Sarah is there, and Thomas, and all the others the Wendigo has taken over the years. They're changing, becoming something new, something hungry, and they're reaching for me with gray hands, inviting me to join their feast. I always wake up from these dreams shivering, no matter how hot the desert night is. Last week, I got a package from Joe. Inside was a single piece of ice that wouldn't melt no matter how long I left it in the sun. Frozen inside it was a single perfect handprint, too big to be human. Under it was a note. It's not over. They're waking up again, and this time they're hungrier than ever. I burned the note and buried the ice in the desert sand. But at night, when the moon is full and the wind blows cold from the north, I think about those caves under the lake, about the things that live there, growing stronger, getting ready. And I wonder if someday the hunger will reach even here, where the sun burns hot and the snow never falls. Because that's the thing about hunger. It never really ends. It just sleeps for a while and waits. I always thought I knew every inch of Mammoth Cave, 20 years of mapping its tunnels, and I believed nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. My name is Dr. Eleanor Thompson, and I'm about to tell you why I haven't set foot in a cave for the past 3 months. Why my kids had to come live with their father. Why I wake up screaming most nights, thinking my skin is melting away. It all started with the earthquake. Not a big one, just enough to rattle some dishes and send a few books tumbling from shelves. But deep below ground, in the world's longest cave system, that small shake was enough to crack open something that should have stayed sealed forever. I remember that morning clearly. My team and I were getting ready for what we thought would be a routine mapping expedition. Sarah Chen, my brightest graduate student, was double-checking our equipment while Mike Rodriguez fiddled with the new radio system. They were both so excited, especially after I told them we'd be exploring a section of the cave that the earthquake had revealed. "Dr. T, you've got to see this," Sarah called out, her flashlight beam dancing across the cave wall. She'd found something near the new passage entrance, strange markings that looked older than any we'd seen before. They weren't the usual Native American cave art we sometimes found. These were different. Crude drawings of shapeless figures reaching for stick-figure humans, and beneath them, words carved in Cherokee that made my blood run cold. "The hollow ones sleep here. Let them lie." I should have listened, should have sealed up that passage right then and there. But I was a scientist, for heaven's sake. A doctor of speleology with a reputation for being fearless. The woman who'd overcome her own claustrophobia to become one of the leading cave experts in the country. And more than that, I was curious. "We'll proceed with caution," I told my team, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Standard safety protocols, no one goes anywhere alone." The new passage was strange from the start. The walls were too smooth, almost polished in places. Our footsteps echoed wrong, like the sound was being swallowed up rather than bouncing back. The constant 54-degree temperature that was normal for Mammoth Cave seemed colder here, making us shiver despite our gear. We'd been exploring for about 2 hours when our radios started acting up. First just static, then voices we couldn't quite make out. I tried calling base camp, but all I got was a garbled whisper that sounded nothing like our surface team. That's when Tommy, our newest grad student, found the first piece of equipment. It was an old camping lantern, probably from the 1980s judging by its style. But what made us all stare was the way it had melted. Not from heat, but as if it had been dissolved by acid. The metal was warped and bubbled, with holes eaten clean through in places. "Dr. Thompson," Sarah said quietly, her voice shaking. "Look at the ground around it." I shined my light where she pointed. The limestone floor had shallow grooves etched into it, like something had crawled away, leaving trails of something corrosive behind. That should have been our second warning. But by then it was already too late. We'd gone too far into the new passage, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, something had noticed us. Something that had been waiting a very, very long time for visitors. I just didn't know then that 3 of my students would never see daylight again, or that what happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about the creatures that might exist in the deep, dark places of our world. The first scream came just minutes later, echoing through the tunnels like a twisted version of what a human should sound like. And that's when our real nightmare began. The scream didn't sound right. That's what bothered me most. It started like a normal human scream but ended in something else, like the sound was being pulled through water. "Tommy?" I called out, my voice echoing off the cave walls. "Sarah, everyone, sound off." "Here," Sarah answered from somewhere to my left. "Present," Mike said, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But Tommy didn't answer. My hand shook as I reached for my radio. "Base camp, this is Thompson. We have a situation." Only static answered. The radio crackled, then went dead. "We need to find Tommy," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. I could hear the fear she was trying to hide. He was only about 20 feet ahead of us. We moved, forward slowly, our light sweeping across the tunnel walls. That's when I noticed something odd. The cave paintings we'd passed earlier were different. I was sure they had shown the shapeless figures reaching for humans, but now they seemed to show the figures, merging with them. "Dr. T?" Mike's voice cracked. "The walls. Are they sweating?" I shined my light where he pointed. The limestone was covered in a thin, clear fluid that seemed to be seeping from the rock itself. When I moved closer to examine it, a drop fell on my jacket sleeve. Within seconds, it had eaten a small hole through the fabric. "Nobody touch the walls," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. "And watch where you step." We found Tommy's backpack next. It was lying in the middle of the passage, partially melted like the old lantern we'd found earlier. His flashlight was a few feet away, still on but pointing at the ceiling. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Listen." We all went still. In the absolute darkness of the cave, you can hear things you'd miss anywhere else. At first, I thought it was just the usual dripping of water, but this sound was different, like something soft being dragged across stone. Then Mike's light caught something that made my heart stop. A handprint on the wall, but wrong, too long. Fingers like melted wax dripping down the rock face. And it was fresh. "Tommy," a voice called from up ahead. It sounded like Tommy, but not quite. Like someone trying to copy his voice without quite getting it right. "Don't answer," I whispered, pulling Sarah and Mike back. "That's not him." The dragging sound got closer. In the beam of our lights, I saw something move in the darkness ahead. It looked like a person at first, about Tommy's height and build. But as it came closer, I realized with growing horror that what I was seeing wasn't possible. The thing wearing Tommy's shape was almost transparent, its internal organs visible through skin that rippled like gelatin. It moved wrong, its joints bending in ways human bones couldn't allow. When it saw us, it smiled with Tommy's face, but the expression stretched too wide, like a mask being pulled apart. "Dr. Thompson," it said in that almost Tommy voice. "I learned so much. Want to see?" Before we could move, it began to change. Its body flattened like paper, pressing itself against the cave wall. In seconds, it was no thicker than a sheet of cardboard, sliding along the rock face toward us. "Run!" I screamed, pushing Sarah and Mike back the way we'd come. "Don't let it touch you." We ran through the tunnels, our lights bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind us, I could hear more voices now, all slightly wrong, all calling our names. And underneath those voices, a sound like wet meat slapping against stone. Sarah was crying as we ran, but she kept up. Mike had pulled ahead, leading us back toward the main passage. But something was wrong. The tunnels weren't the same as before. Passages that should have been there were missing, replaced by solid rock. It was as if the cave itself was changing around us. "This isn't possible," Mike panted, shining his light down another unfamiliar tunnel. "We mapped this section yesterday. These walls can't just move." But they had. And somewhere in the darkness behind us, something that looked like Tommy but wasn't Tommy was getting closer. Something that had learned to copy his shape, his voice, maybe even his memories. I pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd sketched our route on the way in. But when I looked at the page, the ink was running, the paper dissolving from contact with something wet, something that had gotten on my hands when I examined the wall earlier. That's when we heard the second scream. And this time it was Mike's voice, his real voice, full of terror and pain. What happened next would change everything we thought we knew about Mammoth Cave, about what lives in the deep places of the world, about what it means to be human, and not all of us would survive to tell about it. Mike's scream cut off suddenly like someone had pressed a mute button. Sarah grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. "We have to help him," she whispered. "No," I said, even though it broke my heart. "We can't. They're between us and him now." We pressed ourselves against the wall in a small side tunnel, trying to quiet our breathing. Our flashlight beams showed empty passages, but I knew better now. These creatures could flatten themselves so thin you'd miss them if you weren't looking carefully. That's when we heard footsteps coming toward us. Not the wet sliding sound of the creatures, but regular footsteps. "Dr. Thompson." "Sarah, thank God I found you." It was Mike's voice. He sounded normal, scared but normal. He appeared at the tunnel entrance, looking exactly like himself. Sarah started to move forward, but I held her back. "Mike," I said carefully. "What's the name of your daughter's hamster?" He blinked. "What?" "Dr. T, we need to go." "Answer the question." Smile spread across his face. Too wide, just like Tommy's had been. "Why don't you tell me, Dr. Thompson? After all, you're the one who knows everything." His skin began to ripple and Sarah screamed. We ran again, deeper into the cave system, away from the thing that wasn't Mike. Our lights caught glimpses of movement everywhere, shapes pressing through cracks in the walls, sliding across the ceiling, all of them moving like liquid poured into human-shaped containers. We ended up in a large chamber I'd never seen before. As soon as our lights swept across it, I wished we hadn't found it. The floor was littered with things, old cave gear, clothes, bones. Some of it looked decades old. And everywhere, covering everything, were trails of that clear, acid-like slime. "Oh God," Sarah choked out. "They've been here all along. Every missing caver, every unexplained disappearance." I moved our light beam to the walls. They were covered in more cave paintings, but these were different. They showed the history of these creatures, how they'd lived here for thousands of years, how they learned to copy humans by touching them, absorbing their memories and shapes. "Dr. T," Sarah's voice shook. "Look at the ceiling." I lifted my light. Above us, dozens of transparent shapes clung to the rock. They were smaller than the ones we'd seen, about the size of footballs. They pulsed slowly, and inside each one, I could see something dark moving. "They're breeding," I whispered. "This is their nursery." A drop of slime fell from one of the shapes, landing inches from my foot. The limestone sizzled where it hit. That's when we heard the voices, Tommy's, Mike's, and others I didn't recognize. They were coming from every tunnel leading into the chamber. The creatures had herded us here like sheep into a pen. "Sarah," I said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you. When I was mapping the lower levels last year, I found old mining equipment, explosives. I marked them on my map but never reported them because they were unstable. How does that help us? These creatures, and they're sensitive to vibration, that's how they navigate. A big enough explosion could collapse this whole section of cave," she finished. "But Dr. T, we'd never make it out in time." I pulled out my map. Most of the ink had dissolved, but I could still make out the basic layout. "There's a vertical shaft about 200 feet from here. It leads to an upper level. If we can reach it..." More voices now, getting closer. The shapes on the ceiling were moving, responding to the vibrations of approaching footsteps. "Dr. Thompson," my own voice called out from one of the tunnels. "Why? Don't you join us? It doesn't hurt, I promise. And afterward, you'll understand everything." Sarah gripped my arm. "They copied you too." "Not yet," I said. "But they will if we don't move now." I reached into my pack and pulled out an emergency flare. Its bright red light would blind us in these tunnels, but it was all we had left. "When I say run," I whispered to Sarah, "don't stop for anything. Don't look back. And whatever you hear that sounds like me, ignore it." The voices were getting closer. Flashlight beams began to appear in the tunnels, held by things that looked human but weren't, and behind them came the real creatures, their bodies merging together into something massive and shapeless. I took one last look at the chamber that had been their breeding ground for who knows how long. Then I struck the flare. "Run!" The red flare light turned the cave into a nightmare of dancing shadows. Sarah and I ran, our footsteps echoing off the walls. Behind us, the creatures shrieked. not copying human voices anymore, but making their own horrible sounds. "Left tunnel," I shouted, remembering the map. "The shaft should be straight ahead." We turned the corner and stopped dead. The tunnel ahead was filled with water, dark, cold cave water that hadn't seen light in centuries. "The earthquake," Sarah gasped. "It must have broken through to an underground river." A splash behind us. In the red flare light, I saw something rise from a puddle, a human shape made of water that slowly turned solid. It looked like Mike again, but now its skin was so clear I could see every organ inside, pulsing and moving in ways they shouldn't. "The Ivan shaft," Not Mike said in a bubbly voice. "Yes, we remember it. We've been there before, Eleanor. Many times, with many others." More shapes were forming from the water. I saw Tommy, other missing cavers, and even myself, all with that same transparent skin, all wrong in little ways that made my stomach turn. "Sarah," I said quietly, "take the flare. When I say go, run through the water. The shaft is just on the other side. There's an old mining ladder. You can climb out." "What about you?" I pulled out my backup flare and the matches I always carried in a waterproof case. "I'm going to visit that old mining equipment we talked about." She understood immediately. "No, I won't leave you. You have to." I handed her my phone, sealed in its waterproof case. "Get to the surface. Call this number. It's a friend at the Geological Survey. Tell him code word hollow. He'll know what to do." The water was rising now, and the creatures were getting closer. They moved together like mercury, forming one massive shape that touched the ceiling. "Go!" I yelled, striking my flare. The bright red light made the water look like blood. Sarah ran, splashing through the flooded tunnel. The creatures tried to follow her, but I swung my flare in a wide arc, driving them back. They hated the light. It made their transparent bodies twist and bubble. "Come on then," I shouted at them. "You want my memories? Come and get them." I turned and ran down a different tunnel, the one that led to the old mining section. The creatures followed, their combined mass making a sound like a wave crashing on rocks. My boots splashed through puddles as I ran, counting tunnels. Third, right, second left, straight ahead to where the miners had left their equipment almost a century ago. The explosives would be unstable after all this time. Perfect for what I needed. I could hear them behind me, getting closer. They didn't copy voices anymore. They just made a horrible wet sound, like someone drowning but still trying to speak. Finally, I saw it. The old mining cart, rusted but still recognizable. And next to it, wooden boxes with faded warning labels. The dynamite inside would be as dangerous as nitroglycerin by now. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached me. In the red flare light, I could see the tunnel walls moving, transparent shapes pressing through the rock itself. They were everywhere. My hands shook as I opened the first box. The dynamite sticks were old and sweating chemicals, ready to go off at the slightest shock. Perfect. I heard Sarah's voice from far above. She'd reached the shaft. Good. The creatures were at the tunnel entrance now, forming into something huge. In my flare's light, I saw a massive transparent thing, organs the size of cars pulsing inside it, faces pressed out from its surface. Tommy, Mike, and dozens of others I didn't recognize. "Your memories will join ours," it said in 100 voices at once. "Your shape will be added to our shape." I held up the flare, letting them see what I had in my other hand. "You've been down here too long," I told them. "Time to seal up your home." The creature lunged forward just as I dropped the flare onto the box of dynamite. The last thing I remember was a flash of light brighter than the sun, and a sound that shook the whole world, then darkness. But that wasn't the end. No, the real horror was what happened next, when I woke up in the hospital 3 days later with memories that weren't mine. Memories of dark places, of changing shape, of hunting through tunnels for countless years. And sometimes when I look in the mirror just right, I swear I can see my organs through my skin. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that Sarah has started acting strange. Yesterday when she visited me, her smile was just a little too wide, and I can't be sure, but I think I saw her skin ripple. just for a second, like water in a cave pool. They told me I was found at the cave entrance, though I don't remember how I got there. My clothes were soaked and my skin was covered in a clear substance that the doctors couldn't identify. It disappeared before they could run tests. The official story is that a minor earthquake caused a cave-in. They say Mike and Tommy were tragic accidents. The papers called it a natural disaster, but I know better. The government people came a week after I got out of the hospital. Men in dark suits who asked too many questions and wrote everything down in black notebooks. They were especially interested in the memories, the ones that weren't mine. Tell us again about the breeding chamber, they said, about how they communicate, about how they change shape. I told them everything, even though it hurt to remember, about how the creatures had lived down there for thousands of years, about how they learned to copy us, starting with the first Native Americans who found their caves, about how they kept growing, learning, spreading. And you're sure you sealed the entrance? They asked for the 100th time. Yes, I lied, because here's the truth, the part I didn't tell them, the part I'm telling you now. You can't seal up. Water. You can't trap something that can make itself thinner than paper, that can seep through the smallest crack in the rock. 2 days ago, I saw a news report about strange disappearances in caves across the country, not just in Kentucky anymore. Reports from caves in Tennessee, Virginia, even as far as New Mexico. People going in and coming out. Different. Sarah visits me every week. Her smile gets a little wider each time. Yesterday, she brought her sister with her. Her sister smiled too wide as well. I've started noticing things around town. People moving just a bit wrong. Skin that seems to ripple when they think no one's looking. Too wide smiles everywhere. The creatures didn't die in that explosion. They learned from it, adapted, just like they've been learning from every human they've ever copied. I think about my kids sometimes, living with their father in Ohio. Safe, I hope, far from any caves. I sent him a letter last week telling him to keep them away from dark places, to watch out for people with wide smiles, to run if he ever sees skin ripple like water. The doctors say I'm paranoid. They've given me pills to help me sleep, to stop the nightmares. But they're not nightmares when you're awake. I know what's coming. The creatures are patient. They've waited thousands of years in their caves. Now they're ready to come out into our world, and they're wearing our faces. So let me give you some advice. If you're ever in a cave or even a dark basement and you hear someone you know calling your name, don't answer. If you see someone you recognize but their smile is just a bit too wide, run. And if you ever look in the mirror and see your skin ripple, even for a second, well, by then it'll be too late. Because the Hollow Men aren't just in Mammoth Cave anymore. They're everywhere, and they're still hungry for shapes to wear. Classified document ends. Note: the following materials have been sealed by order of the United States Geological Survey. Case number 47B. All cave systems mentioned in this report are currently closed for maintenance. Dr. Eleanor Thompson's current location is classified. Her last known statement: watch the water, always watch the water. Red territory. The arrival eye should have known something was wrong the moment I saw those red patches on the ancient redwood trees. But after 20 years as a park ranger, you start thinking you've seen it all. I was about to learn how wrong I could be. My name is Jackson Hayes. I've been a ranger for most of my life, following in my grandfather's footsteps. He was a tribal elder who taught me about our people's connection to the land. The forest speaks, he used to say, but only to those who know how to listen. After serving as a Green Beret and then 15 years at Yellowstone, I thought I knew how to listen pretty well. Turns out some voices in nature are better left unheard. It was my third week at Redwood National Park. The transfer from Yellowstone was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to work among the tallest trees on Earth. These giants have stood here for over 2,000 years, their massive trunks stretching up into a constant blanket of fog that hangs around their crowns. Most days, you can't even see the tops, just these enormous brown columns disappearing into the mist. That morning started like any other. I was doing my usual patrol, checking the hiking trails and making sure no tourists had wandered off the marked paths. The air was thick with moisture, and my boots made soft squishing sounds in the damp earth. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Now that I think about it, no bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, just the soft drip of water from leaves and that ever-present mist. I first spotted it near Tall Trees Grove, a patch of red growth on one of the oldest redwoods. It wasn't the usual orange red of the healthy moss we sometimes see. This was different. Deep red, almost the color of blood, and it seemed to pulse slightly when I shone my flashlight on it. I've seen all kinds of fungus and moss in my career, but nothing like this. I reached out to touch it, stupid move, I know now. But before my fingers made contact, a sharp pain shot through my head. For a split second, I could have sworn I heard whispers, like dozens of voices speaking in a language I didn't understand, but somehow felt familiar. It reminded me of the ancient stories my grandfather used to tell about forest spirits, the ones that protected sacred places. But this didn't feel protective. It felt hungry. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Hayes, you copy?" It was Linda from dispatch. "We've got a situation. Group of hikers missed their check-in last night. Last known location was somewhere near your position." "Copy that," I responded, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. "Any contact from them at all?" "Negative. Family's getting worried. They were supposed to camp at Boulder Creek site." I took one last look at the red growth. It seemed to have spread slightly, even in the few minutes I'd been standing there. "I'll head over and check it out." As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. At the base of the tree, half hidden in the thick undergrowth, was a hiking boot. It was covered in that same red moss, and next to it was a trail of what looked like red sap leading deeper into the forest. The wind picked up suddenly, making the massive trees creak and groan. Through the mist, I could have sworn I saw something move between the trunks, something big. But when I focused my eyes, there was nothing there except more of that red moss, spreading across the forest floor like spilled paint. I clicked my radio again. "Linda, better call in some backup. I've got a feeling this isn't going to be a simple rescue mission." If only I'd known then just how right I was. The forest had been trying to tell me something that morning, just like my grandfather said it would. I just wasn't ready to hear the truth about what was really living among these ancient trees. And the truth, as I would soon discover, was more terrifying than anything my grandfather's stories had prepared me for. The hike to Boulder Creek usually takes about 40 minutes. That day, it felt longer. Every step I took, the forest seemed different, wrong somehow. Even the air felt thick, like breathing through a wet blanket. I kept thinking about what my grandfather told me about these woods. He visited here once, years ago, and said the local tribes had stories about this place. Stories about a guardian spirit that protected the oldest trees. But he also warned that sometimes spirits can change. Like milk left too long in the sun, they can go bad. The first real sign of trouble came when I spotted a deer standing perfectly still in a clearing. Now, I've seen plenty of deer freeze when they notice people, but this was different. This deer was standing straight up, head twisted at an odd angle, staring right at me. Its eyes looked cloudy, and there was that same red moss growing in patches on its fur. "Hey there," I said softly, more to calm myself than the deer. It didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring. Then I noticed more animals gathering at the edges of the clearing. 3 more deer, a couple of raccoons, even a bear, all perfectly still, all watching me, all with patches of that red moss on them. I've faced dangerous animals before, but this was different. These animals weren't acting like animals at all. They moved like puppets, all turning their heads at the exact same time to follow me as I backed away slowly. My radio crackled again. "Hayes, you there?" Linda's voice was tense. "We've got more reports coming in. Other hikers saying they've seen strange red growth on trees and animals acting weird." "Yeah," I whispered, keeping my eyes on the deer. "I'm seeing it too. Any word from park management about this?" They're sending a biology team tomorrow morning, but Hayes, there's something else. I talked to some of the local tribal elders about this. They're scared. Said something about an old story. A spirit that was buried here centuries ago. They say it's waking up. I remembered more of my grandfather's teachings then. He'd told me that sometimes the land itself can hold memories like scars, and sometimes those scars can reopen. The wind picked up again, and this time I definitely saw movement in the trees. The branches were swaying, but not with the wind against it, and that red moss was spreading right before my eyes, creeping across the bark like slow-moving blood. I finally reached the Boulder Creek campsite, and my heart sank. The hikers' tents were still there, but they were covered in that red growth. Their camping gear was scattered everywhere, like they'd left in a hurry, or something had made them leave. What really got me was their campfire. It was stone cold, but around it were 5 sets of footprints in the dirt. They started normally enough, but then they changed. The prints got deeper, like the people were suddenly carrying something heavy, and they all led in different directions, straight into the darkest parts of the forest. I knelt down to examine one of the prints and noticed something that made my blood run cold. The last few steps didn't look human anymore. They looked more like tree roots had grown right out of the footprints. My hand was shaking as I reached for my radio. "Linda, we need to shut down this section of the park, now, and get me everything you can about that old story." I think I stopped. The radio was dead. Not just out of battery, dead. And it was covered in tiny specks of red moss that definitely hadn't been there a minute ago. That's when I heard it. A sound like wooden branches creaking, but almost like words, coming from everywhere at once. And in the mist between the trees, I saw shapes moving. Tall shapes, human-like, but wrong, so wrong. The animals in the clearing had disappeared, but now I could hear them moving through the undergrowth all around me, circling, waiting. I thought about the missing hikers, about the red moss spreading through the forest, about my grandfather's warnings, and I realized that whatever was buried here hadn't just woken up. It was hungry, and it had been waiting a very, very long time. I had 2 choices: head back to the ranger station or follow one of those twisted trails that led from the camp. As a ranger, my job was to find those missing hikers, but everything I'd learned in the military was screaming at me to get back up first. Before I could decide, a thick red mist started rolling in between the trees. Not the usual white fog we get in the redwoods. This was different. It moved like it had a mind of its own, curling around tree trunks and reaching out with wispy fingers. Then I heard something that made my decision for me. A human voice, calling for help. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please." It came from somewhere. The mist, down one of those root-like trails. I pulled out my flashlight and started walking, trying to ignore how the beam turned reddish in the strange fog. "Keep calling out," I shouted. "I'm coming to help." The voice came again, but this time it sounded wrong, like someone trying to remember how to speak. "Help! Please, help!" I followed it deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to grow thicker here, their trunks pressed so close together that I had to squeeze between them. The red moss was everywhere now, coating everything like a thick carpet. That's when I noticed my boots. The moss was growing up them, trying to root me to the spot. I quickly scraped it off, but my skin started itching where I'd touched it. Suddenly, my flashlight caught something ahead, a splash of bright color. A blue hiking jacket hung on a branch. As I got closer, I saw it was one of the missing hikers' jackets, but it was half absorbed into the tree trunk, like the wood had grown around. The voice called again, closer now. "Over here, please." I turned toward it and froze. About 20 feet away stood what looked like a person made entirely of wood and red moss. It was roughly human-shaped, but too tall, its arms too long. Where its face should have been, there was just a hollow filled with that pulsing red growth. "Please," it said in that not-quite-human voice, reaching out with fingers that looked like twisted branches. I backed away slowly, remembering my grandfather's words. "Some spirits don't just take your life, they take who you are." More shapes were emerging from the mist now. Some looked like trees that had torn themselves up by the roots. Others were like the first one, human-shaped but wrong, and mixed in with them were animals, all moving in that unnatural way, all covered in red moss. My radio suddenly burst to life with static and Linda's voice. Hayes, do you copy? The biology team found something. There's some kind of fungus spreading through the root system of the whole forest. It's changing. Everything it touches. You need to get out of there now. The creature that had been calling me took a step forward. Behind it, I could see more of those wood people emerging from the trees. Some of them wore tattered pieces of hiking gear. I turned and ran. Not my proudest moment, but sometimes running is the smartest thing you can do. I could hear them behind me, the cracking of wooden limbs, the rustle of moss, and those horrible, almost human voices calling out. The red mist was getting thicker, making it hard to see where I was going. My head started spinning, and strange images flashed through my mind. Visions of roots growing through my body, of becoming one of those things in the fog. I stumbled and fell. The moss immediately started growing over my hands where they touched the ground. I pulled them free and scrambled up, but now I was turned around. Everything looked the same in the red mist. That's when I saw it, the thing the spirit really was. Through the fog, I caught glimpses of something massive moving between the trees, not wood, not moss, but something else. Something ancient and hungry that had been sleeping under the forest for centuries. The red mist swirled around me, and I felt it trying to get inside my head, trying to make me walk toward those wooden shapes that used to be people, trying to make me become one of them. But my grandfather had taught me something else too, how to protect my mind against spirits that want to get in. I started reciting the old words he'd made me memorize over and over. The wooden figures were closing in. The red mist was so thick I could barely breathe, and somewhere in the fog, that ancient thing was watching, waiting to see if I'd become its next victim or if it would have to deal with me another way. I had no weapons that would work against this thing, no way to call for help, and I was pretty sure I knew what had happened to those missing hikers. The question was, would I be joining them? The words my grandfather taught me seemed to work, at least a little. The wooden figures backed away, and the red mist thinned enough for me to see where I was. I found myself in a part of the forest I'd never seen before, where the trees grew in an almost perfect circle. That's when my radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice. Tom, one of the senior rangers. Hayes, we've got the rescue. Team heading your way. We can see the red mist from the helicopter. Hold on. I wanted to tell them to stay away, but before I could, I heard the helicopter. The sound echoed through the trees, and something else answered it. A deep rumble from underground that shook the whole forest. The rescue team arrived in their bright orange gear, looking so normal and out of place in this nightmare. There were 5 of them. Sarah, Mike, Bill, Rachel, and Dr. Chen from the biology team. They found me by following their GPS devices. Hayes, you look terrible, Sarah said, helping me up. What happened here? Before I could warn them, the red mist started creeping back. Dr. Chen bent down to take a sample, even though I tried to stop him. Fascinating, he said, not noticing the tiny red spores floating up from where he touched the moss. It seems to be some kind of ancient fungus, but it's behaving more like a single organism. And look at how it reacts to... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes going wide. The spores he'd disturbed were spreading across his hand like tiny red veins. "Everyone, get back!" I shouted, but it was too late. The spores were everywhere now, and the rescue team started coughing. That's when we heard it, a sound like huge tree roots cracking underground. The ground actually moved under our feet, and trees at the edge of the circle began to bend and twist. "Run!" I yelled, but Sarah and Mike were already changing. Red moss crept across their skin, and their movements became stiff and wooden. Bill and Rachel made it a few steps before they froze too, their bodies slowly turning into those same wood people I'd seen before. Only Dr. Chen and I escaped the circle. As we ran, he kept talking, his scientist's mind still trying to understand what was happening even as the red moss crept up his arm. "It's not just a fungus," he gasped. "It's some kind of hive mind, all connected through the roots. The whole forest is infected, and it's... He never finished. The red moss reached his neck and he stopped running. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were already glazed over with that awful red growth. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. When I finally stopped, I was near an old part of the forest I'd never seen marked on any map. There was something different about these trees. They were arranged in strange patterns and old carvings covered their trunks. That's when I remembered another part of my grandfather's stories. He'd said that long ago, his people had fought a great spirit that lived in the forest. They couldn't kill it, but they found a way to put it to sleep. They buried it in a sacred place, using old magic to keep it trapped. Looking at those carvings now, I realized where I was. This wasn't just some random part of the forest. This was the burial ground. And those carvings weren't just decorations. They were warnings. The ground shook again, harder this time. The red mist swirled around me, and in it, I saw faces. The missing hikers, the rescue team, maybe even older victims, all of them trapped inside whatever this thing was. Then I felt it, something trying to get inside my head. Not like before, but stronger, much stronger. The ancient spirit itself was reaching out, trying to take control of my mind. Images flashed through my brain, the forest spreading, the red moss growing, people changing into wooden creatures. I saw its plan. It wouldn't stop here. First the park, then the nearby towns. Then I fought against it, using every protection my grandfather had taught me. But this thing was strong, stronger than anything I'd ever faced. And it had been feeding, growing more powerful with each person it took. Through the red mist, I saw the rescue team and the hikers approaching, their wooden bodies moving like puppets. Behind them, something huge was finally showing itself, a shape so terrible my mind could barely understand what I was seeing. The spirit wasn't just controlling the forest anymore. It had become the forest, and now it was rising up from its ancient burial ground, ready to take back its territory. I reached for my radio one last time, hoping to warn someone, anyone. But all that came through was a sound like rushing wind and creaking wood and words in a language I somehow understood. "Your people trapped me here. Now you will help me get out." Standing there, surrounded by the possessed forest and facing an ancient spirit that wanted to take over my mind, I realized something. My grandfather hadn't just taught me those protective words for no reason. He'd been preparing me for this moment all along. My grandfather once told me that every spirit, no matter how powerful, has a weakness. The trick is being willing to pay the price to find it. As the ancient thing rose up through the red mist, I finally saw it clearly. It was like a mountain of twisted wood and red moss with dozens of faces trapped in its surface. Some human, some animal, all of them silently screaming. At its heart was a deep red glow, pulsing like a giant heartbeat. The wooden figures that used to be people surrounded me. The hiking group, the rescue team, and others I didn't recognize. Their hollow faces all turned toward me at once. "Join us," they said in that horrible creaking voice. "Become part of the forest." The spirit pushed harder at my mind, showing me visions of power, of becoming one with the forest, of helping it, spread across the whole country. Part of me actually wanted to give in. That's what scared me most. But then I remembered something else my grandfather taught me. He said the oldest spirits were like old trees. Their roots went deep, but fire could still hurt them. Not regular fire, but sacred fire. Started with special words and offerings. I had everything I needed in my pockets. My grandfather's lighter, some dried herbs he'd given me years ago, just in case, and an old piece of paper with words written on it that I'd never really understood until now. The spirit must have sensed what I was thinking. The wooden figures rushed at me all at once. I felt branches wrap around my arms, trying to infect me with that red moss, but I had one arm free, and I managed to get the lighter out. "I'm sorry. I whispered to the figures that used to be people. Then I lit the herbs and started speaking the words. The effect was immediate. The red mist pulled back like it had been hit. The wooden figures let go of me, stumbling away. The giant spirit made a sound like 1,000 trees falling at once, but fought back hard. A wave of red moss shot toward me like a living thing. Where it touched my left arm, the infection started immediately. I could feel it trying to turn my flesh to wood, crawling up toward my shoulder. The pain was horrible, but I kept speaking the words. The herbs burned with a strange blue flame now, and where their smoke touched the red moss, it withered and died. The spirit thrashed and twisted. Its huge form started to crack, red light pouring out from inside it. The wooden figures began to crumble, the moss falling away from them in chunks. "You're killing them all!" the spirit roared in my head. "No," I answered out loud. "You already did that. I'm setting them free." I spoke the final words my grandfather had taught me. The blue fire leaped from the herbs to the ground, spreading in a circle. Where it touched the roots of the possessed trees, they burned with that same blue light. The spirit made one last attack. A massive wave of red moss and twisted wood crashed down toward me. I held my ground and kept speaking, even as the infection spread past my shoulder. Then something amazing happened. The faces trapped in the spirit's body started glowing with that blue fire. I saw the hikers, the rescue team, and hundreds of others, all pushing their way out. The spirit's power over them was breaking. With a sound like a thunderclap, the giant spirit collapsed. The red mist vanished. The wooden figures fell apart completely, leaving only piles of normal moss and wood. I fell to my knees, exhausted. My left arm was almost completely transformed, covered in wood and red moss from fingers to shoulder. But as the blue fire spread through the forest, burning away all traces of the spirit's power, the infection stopped spreading. The forest was quiet again. Normal fog drifted between the trees. Birds started singing somewhere in the distance. Everything looked ordinary, except for my arm and the circles of blue fire slowly fading into the ground. When the rescue helicopters finally found me, I was sitting by one of the old carved trees. They had a lot of questions about what happened, about the red moss samples they'd collected that now looked like normal growth, about why so many trees in the area looked like they'd been burned by cold blue fire. They also had questions about my arm. The doctors said they'd never seen anything like it. Not quite wood, not quite flesh, and definitely not normal. They wanted to amputate, but I refused. The hikers and rescue team were found scattered through the forest. Some were in hospitals, stuck in deep comas. Others couldn't remember anything that had happened. A few, like me, had strange marks or changes that wouldn't go away. The Park Service closed this section of the forest for environmental studies. They put up fences and posted guards. But sometimes, late at night, I go back there, because my arm tingles when I'm near those old trees, and sometimes I swear I can hear the plants growing. The spirit isn't dead. Things that old don't really die, but it's sleeping again, trapped once more in its underground prison. The blue fire marks on the trees will help keep it there, as long as someone remembers to check on them. That's my job now. My grandfather was preparing me for this all along, I think. He knew someone would need to stay and watch, to listen to the forest and make sure that ancient thing stays asleep. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and red, I wonder, what other spirits are out there, waiting to wake up? And will we be ready when they do? At least now I know how to listen to the forest, even if sometimes I wish I couldn't. The long dark. The radio crackled to life at 3 a.m., waking me from my light sleep. Through the static I heard screaming. Not the kind of screaming you hear when someone's hurt themselves. This was different. Pure terror. Then silence. I'm Victoria Palmer, a park ranger at Denali National Park in Alaska. Most people think being a ranger means helping lost hikers and warning tourists not to feed the bears. But up here, during the polar night when the sun doesn't rise for months, it's different. Very different. That radio call came from the Anderson Research Station, a small building tucked away in the mountains where scientists study rocks and ice cores. I hadn't heard from them in 3 days, which wasn't too unusual given the weather. But those screams, they changed everything. I should mention that I'm used to being alone in the darkness. After my brother Mike died in a climbing accident 5 years ago, I chose this job because it let me be by myself. Being an Olympic biathlete taught me how to handle the cold and shoot straight, skills I never thought I'd need as badly as I did that night. The temperature reading on my cabin wall showed 42 degrees. Outside my window, the northern lights danced across the sky, painting everything in strange green and purple colors. Beautiful, but somehow wrong tonight. The lights seemed to pulse in a way I'd never seen before. I pulled on my heavy winter gear, checked my rifle, and packed my emergency kit. The research station was a 2-hour snowmobile ride away. As I stepped outside, the cold hit my face like a slap. The snow crunched under my boots and my breath made little clouds in my headlamp's beam. But something else caught my eye. The shadows on the snow. They weren't right. Shadows are supposed to be still, but these seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And they were darker than they should be, like holes in the world. I've spent 15 years in these mountains. I know every sound, every sight, every danger. But what I was about to face that night was something no training could have prepared me for. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about darkness. As I fired up my snowmobile, I remembered the last thing the station's lead scientist had said to me 3 days ago. Victoria, there's something in the ice. Something that shouldn't be here. I should have listened more carefully to those words. Maybe then I would have been better prepared for the horrors that waited for me at Anderson Station. But how could anyone be prepared to face shadows that hunt? The northern lights flickered again, and I swear I saw shapes moving within them. Dark shapes. Watching. Waiting. This is the story of the longest night of my life. A night that never really ended. The snowmobile's headlight cut through the darkness as I followed the familiar trail to Anderson Station. Usually I could see the station's lights from miles away, like a lighthouse in the endless night. But tonight there was nothing. Just darkness. My radio kept making weird noises. Not static. Something else. It sounded almost like whispers. I tried calling the station again. Anderson Station, this is Ranger Palmer. Please respond. Nothing but those strange whispers. The cold was getting worse. My thermometer now read 45 degrees. Cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. But something felt wrong about this cold. It felt hungry. After about an hour of riding, I started seeing weird things in my headlight beam. Dark patches in the snow that didn't look like normal shadows. When I drove through one, my snowmobile's engine sputtered, and the temperature dropped even more. I had to swerve to avoid the bigger dark spots. Finally, I saw Anderson Station ahead. It was a 2-story building made of metal and thick glass, built to withstand the worst Arctic storms. But now it looked dead. No lights, no movement. Just darkness and those strange shadows surrounding it. I parked my snowmobile and pulled out my flashlight and rifle. The beam showed fresh snowmobile tracks leading away from the station, but they just stopped suddenly, like the vehicles had. Vanished into thin air. That's not possible, I told myself. There has to be an explanation. My boots crunched in the snow as I approached the main door. The keypad lock was frozen solid, covered in a layer of ice I'd never seen before. I had to use my knife to chip it away. When I finally got the door open, a blast of even colder air hit me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the dark hallways. "This is Ranger Palmer. Is anyone here?" The inside of the station was a mess. Papers everywhere. Coffee cups still half full, now frozen solid. Chairs knocked over. But no people. My flashlight beam caught something strange on one of the walls, a perfect shadow of a person, like a photograph negative. But when I touched it, the wall was covered in a layer of ice so cold it burned through my glove. In the main lab, I found Dr. Chen's notebook. The last entry was from 3 days ago. The ice core samples are showing impossible readings. The shadows in them are moving. The aurora seems to be affecting them. We need to stop the dig. We need Stui, the entry ended there, like he'd been interrupted. Then I heard it. A soft padding sound, like wolf paws on the floor above me. But wolves don't come this close to research stations, and normal wolves don't make the shadows bend around them, like curtains. My flashlight started flickering. The batteries were new, but something was draining them. The radio at my belt burst into static, and through it I heard words that made my blood freeze. Dark. Coming. Run. I spun around, rifle ready. In the beam of my dying flashlight, I saw something that shouldn't be possible. A shadow was peeling itself off the wall. It had the shape of a wolf, but it was made of pure darkness. Its eyes reflected the colors of the aurora outside, swirling with green and purple light. The temperature plummeted. My flashlight died. In the darkness, I heard more padding footsteps. Not just one set now. Many. They had been waiting for me. Backed away slowly, remembering my winter survival training. Stay calm. Think. Observe. The shadow wolves seemed to avoid the patches of aurora light coming through the windows. That was something. My hand touched a door handle. The emergency. Stairs. The wolves moved closer, their aurora eyes fixed on me. I could feel their hunger, not for food, for something else, something worse. In one quick move, I yanked the door open and dove through it. Behind me, I heard howls that didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard. They sounded like the wind in deep caves, like the voice of the darkness itself. I had found. What happened to the research team? Now I just had to survive long enough to tell someone about it. But as I ran down those stairs, I realized something even more terrifying. These creatures weren't just hunting me. They were playing with me. And this was just the beginning of their game. The emergency stairs led down to the station's basement level. My breathing was loud in the darkness as I pulled out my backup flashlight, a small one I always kept in my jacket pocket. Its beam was weak, but it was better than nothing. The basement was where the team kept their ice core samples, long tubes of ancient ice drilled from deep in the glacier. The room should have been freezing cold because of the special freezers, but somehow it felt even colder than that. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. That's when I found Dr. Chen. He was sitting in a corner, frozen solid, but this wasn't normal freezing. His skin was covered in those same strange shadows I'd seen upstairs, like dark frost spreading across his face. His eyes were open wide, and his mouth was frozen in a silent scream. Next to his hand was a voice. Recorder. With shaking fingers, I picked it up. It still worked somehow. I pressed play, and Dr. Chen's voice filled the room. Day 47 of the ice core study. We found something in the deep samples. Not fossils, not bacteria. Shadows. Living shadows. They've been trapped in the ice for I don't know how long. The aurora is affecting them, making them stronger. They're getting out, Static cut through his voice, then whispers. The same kind I'd heard on my radio. I quickly turned it off. A scratching sound came from the ceiling above me. The shadow. Wolves were searching. I could hear them moving around upstairs, their paws making that weird, soft padding sound. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Moving as quietly as I could, I went to the ice core storage room. The giant freezer doors were wide open, letting out clouds of frozen air. Inside, rows of ice cores were lined up on metal racks. But something was wrong with them. The cores were melting, but not like normal ice. The water running from them was black, like ink. And in the ice that was still frozen, I could see shadows moving, twisting, looking at me. My flashlight beam caught something on the floor, a journal. Not Dr. Chen's this time. This one belonged to Sarah Martinez, the team's ice expert. I opened it carefully, the pages crackling with frost. The shadows in the ice are getting stronger every night. They respond to the aurora's light. They're not just random shapes, they're alive, intelligent. They can reach into our minds when we sleep, show us things, terrible things. Last night they showed me what they want. They want out. They want bodies, our bodies. I heard a low growl behind me. Slowly I turned around. A shadow wolf stood in the doorway. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its body was made of swirling darkness, like smoke, but solid somehow. Its eyes swirled with the same colors as the aurora outside. When it looked at me, I felt a cold pressure in my head, like it was trying to get inside my mind. "Stay back," I said, pointing my rifle at it. "But how do you shoot a shadow?" The wolf took a step forward. Where its paw touched the ground, frost spread across the floor. The temperature dropped so low, my eyes hurt. More wolves appeared behind. The first one, their aurora eyes all fixed on me. Then they did something I'll never forget. They spoke, not with voices, but directly into my mind. "Join us. So cold. So long in the ice. Need warmth. Need you." My head felt like it was splitting open. Images flashed through my mind. Endless years trapped in the dark ice, watching the world above through frozen windows, waiting for a chance to be free. "No!" I shouted, backing away. My shoulder hit a shelf of ice cores. They crashed to the floor, shattering. Black water splashed everywhere. The wolves lunged forward. I did the only thing I could think of. I aimed my rifle at the overhead lights and fired. The bullets shattered the fluorescent tubes, sending a shower of sparks raining down. The shadow wolves howled and pulled back, trying to avoid the light. And through the storage room, past Dr. Chen's body, up the emergency stairs. The wolves followed, but they had to stick to the shadows, which slowed them down. Every time they got close, I could feel that cold pressure in my head, trying to get in. I made it to the main floor, gasping for breath. The aurora outside was brighter now, its light streaming through the windows in waves of green and purple. The shadow wolves hung back in the dark corners, watching me, waiting. That's when I realized something important. These creatures weren't just hunting for fun. They were desperate. They had been trapped in that ice for maybe thousands of years. Now they were free, but they couldn't survive long in our world without hosts. I remembered the missing research, team members. Had the wolves already gotten to them? Were they now walking around with shadows inside them, looking just like normal people? A loud cracking sound came from below. The black water from the melted ice cores was spreading throughout. The building and more shadow wolves were forming from it. Soon the whole station would be overrun. I needed a plan. The wolves avoided bright light, and they seemed to have some strange connection to the aurora. Maybe that was the key. But first I had to find any survivors and get out of here. As if answering my thoughts, a human scream echoed from the second floor. Someone was still alive up there. The shadow wolves turned their glowing eyes toward the sound. One of them looked back at me and sent another thought. Watch, learn, join. I gripped my rifle tighter and headed for the stairs. Someone needed help, and I was the only one who could give it. But deep down, I was terrified of what I might find up there. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping these things before they could spread beyond the station, before they could add more bodies to their collection. The northern lights flickered outside, and in their glow, I saw dozens of dark shapes moving across the snow toward the station. More wolves, coming to join the hunt. Time was running out. I took the stairs to the second floor slowly, keeping my back to the wall. Every few steps, I would shine my flashlight behind me to make sure the shadow wolves weren't following. They were still there, but keeping their distance, watching with those strange aurora-colored eyes. Another scream came from above, closer now. A woman's voice. It sounded like Emma, one of the younger researchers. The second floor was the living area, with bedrooms and a small kitchen. The shadows here were deeper, moving like curtains in a breeze. My flashlight beam was getting weaker, and the cold was so bad my fingers were going numb, even through my gloves. "Emma?" I called out softly. "It's Victoria Palmer, the ranger. Are you here?" "Help." The voice came from the last room on the right. "Please help." I reached the door and pushed it open slowly. Emma was there, huddled in a corner. She looked okay at first, until I noticed the shadows moving across her skin like dark veins. "Emma, can you hear me?" She looked up, and my heart nearly stopped. Her eyes were swirling with aurora colors just like the wolves. "Run," she whispered, but it wasn't just her voice. Other voices were mixed with it, cold and ancient. They're inside me now. Can't stop them. The shadows on her skin were spreading faster. She screamed again, but this time it turned into a sound no human should make, like ice cracking deep underground. So warm, the voices said through her mouth. Need more. Emma's body started to change. The shadows weren't just on her skin anymore. They were replacing it. I backed away as she stood up, her shape blurring and twisting. I'm sorry, I whispered and ran. Behind me, something that wasn't Emma anymore crashed through the doorway. I sprinted down the hallway, passing more rooms with dark shapes moving inside them. How many of the research team had the wolves gotten? I reached the stairs but stopped dead. The way down was blocked by shadow wolves, their dark bodies flowing up the steps like smoke. I was trapped. Then I remembered something. The station had been built on top of some small ice caves. There was an emergency access hatch somewhere up here, leading down into them. The thing that used to be Emma was getting closer. More shadow-possessed researchers were coming out of the other rooms. Their bodies flickered between human and wolf shapes, like they couldn't decide what to be. I ran to the storage closet where I'd seen the hatch before. It was there, a metal circle in the floor. As I pulled it open, the cold hit me like a punch. The caves below were pitch black, but they were my only chance. I grabbed a flare from my emergency kit, lit it, and dropped it down. The red light showed metal ladder rungs going down about 20 feet. Behind me, the shadows were getting closer. Taking a deep breath, I started climbing down. The hatch wouldn't lock from this side, but maybe the shadow creatures would have trouble following on the narrow ladder. I was wrong. They flowed down the walls like water, their aurora eyes lighting up the darkness. The possessed researchers stayed above, but the wolves had no trouble moving through the narrow space. My boots hit solid ice. The cave floor was slippery, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. My flare's red light made the ice walls glow, showing dozens of tunnels leading off in different directions. That's when I saw them. More ice cores, much bigger than the ones upstairs, half buried in the cave walls. And in each one, shadows were moving. This wasn't just where the station had found the shadow wolves. This was their nest, their prison. Until the research team's drilling had started letting them out. I ran down one of the tunnels, trying to remember the emergency maps I'd studied. One of these caves had to lead outside. Behind me, the wolves flowed across the ice like living ink. The voices filled my head again. Join us. No escape. Make you one of us. My head felt like it was full. The ice. Images kept flashing through my mind, memories that weren't mine. The ages they'd spent frozen. The humans they'd taken before, the way it felt to turn from solid to shadow. No! I shouted, pressing my hands against my temples. I wouldn't let them in. I thought of my brother Mike, how he never gave up even when things were hopeless. I wouldn't give up either. The tunnel opened into a larger cave. My flare was dying, but the ice walls seemed to glow with a strange light. More ice cores stuck out everywhere like giant icicles. In the largest one, something dark and huge was moving. The shadow wolves surrounded me, but they didn't attack. They were waiting for something. The ice in the giant core was cracking. My radio crackled. Through the static, I heard Dr. Chen's voice from his recording. The aurora is affecting them, making them stronger. The aurora. Every time its light touched the wolves, their eyes glowed brighter. There had to be a connection. I looked up. Through cracks in the cave ceiling, I could see the northern lights dancing. They were brighter than ever, pulsing like a heartbeat. The giant ice core split open with a sound like thunder. Something began to rise from it. A shadow wolf bigger than a truck, its eyes blazing with all the colors of the aurora. The alpha, the first one. The oldest. It looked right at me and its thoughts hit my mind like a tidal wave of ice. You will join us. The other wolves moved closer, their shadows starting to wrap around my legs. The cold was everywhere now, seeping into my bones, into my mind. But as I stared into the Alpha's Aurora eyes, I had a crazy idea. If the wolves were connected to the Aurora's power, maybe that power could be used against them. I just had to figure out how, before I became one of them forever. The giant wolf took a step toward me, frost spreading across the cave floor like cracks in glass. Time was running out, and somewhere above us the Aurora's light grew stronger, calling to the shadows that wanted to make me one of their own. The alpha wolf towered over me, its massive shadow body blocking most of the cave. The smaller wolves were all around me now, their cold shadows creeping up my legs. I could barely feel my feet anymore. But I had noticed something important. Every time the Aurora's light pulsed through the cracks above, the wolves' eyes glowed brighter, and for just a second, their shadows became less solid. Like they couldn't hold their shape when the light was too strong. I had one flare left in my pocket. One chance. "You want me?" I shouted at the Alpha. "Come and get me." I broke free from the smaller wolves and ran straight at the huge creature. It was crazy, but I had a plan. The Alpha reared up, its Aurora eyes blazing. The cold in my head was terrible now, like my brain was freezing solid. Join us. Its thoughts slammed into my mind. Images flashed faster and faster. All the people these things had taken over the years. Explorers, researchers, lost hikers, each one becoming part of the Shadow Pack. "No," I growled through chattering teeth. "Not today." I dove between the Alpha's legs, rolling across the ice. Above us, the Aurora was getting brighter, its light pouring through the cracks like green and purple rivers. The Alpha turned, surprisingly fast for something so big. The other wolves were closing in too. They thought they had me trapped against the cave wall. They were right, but that's exactly where I needed to be. I pulled out my last flare and held it up. The wolves hesitated. They didn't like bright light, but one flare wouldn't hurt them much. The Alpha knew this too. It lowered its head, ready to pounce. "You forgot something," I said, my voice shaking from the cold. "I'm a biathlete. I know how to shoot." I aimed my rifle straight up at the biggest crack in the ceiling and fired 3 quick shots. The crack spread, and then the cave ceiling broke open. Aurora light poured in like a waterfall. The wolves screamed, not in my head this time, but with real voices. The sound was like ice breaking and wind howling all at once. The light hit them directly for the first time, and their shadows began to break apart. But they weren't giving up. The Alpha lunged at me, its mouth open in a roar that shook the whole cave. I lit the flare and threw it straight into the creature's mouth. The bright red light exploded inside the Alpha's shadow body. At the same moment, the Aurora light hit it from above. The huge wolf froze, its body starting to crack like broken glass. "Now you join us," it roared in my mind. A wave of shadow shot from its body straight at me, but the Aurora light caught the shadow in midair. For a moment, I saw the shadow's true form in the light. Not a wolf at all, but something ancient and alien that had been trapped in the ice since before humans existed. Then the light became too bright to look at. The Alpha's body shattered like black ice, exploding into thousands of shadow pieces that the Aurora light burned away. The other wolves were breaking apart too, their shadows dissolving in the light. The cold in my head disappeared. The voices went quiet, but it wasn't over yet. The cave was collapsing. The hole I'd made was getting bigger. I ran for the tunnel I came through, dodging falling ice. Behind me, the Alpha's shattered body was still trying to pull itself back together in the shadows between the Aurora pulses. I climbed the ladder as fast as I could. Up in the station, the possessed researchers were changing back. The shadows inside them were being burned away by the light pouring through every window. Emma was herself again, confused but alive. "Victoria, what happened?" "No time!" I grabbed her arm. "We need to get everyone out, now!" We found 3 more survivors and helped them to the main door. The shadow wolves were everywhere, but they were all breaking apart, trying to escape the Aurora's light and failing. We ran to my snowmobile. Behind us, the station's foundations were cracking as the cave collapsed underneath it. The whole building was going down. I got everyone on the snowmobile somehow. It was made for 2 people, but we squeezed on. As we rode away, I looked back. One last time. The station collapsed into the cave with a sound like thunder. The aurora was the brightest I'd ever seen it, its light seeming to focus on that one spot, like it had been waiting all these years to trap the shadow wolves again. In the end, we made it back to my cabin. Of the 12 people at the station, we saved 4. The others, the shadows had already taken them too completely. Emma and the others recovered, but none of us were ever really the same. I still see strange things in the darkness sometimes. Shapes that shouldn't be there. Eyes that glow with aurora colors. The official report said the station was destroyed by a cave-in caused by their drilling. Nobody would believe the truth anyway. But I know what's really out there in the long dark of the polar night. And sometimes, when the aurora is very bright, I think I hear distant howls carried on the wind. They're still out there, somewhere in the deepest ice, waiting, watching. And now, every time I see my own shadow, I check to make sure it's not moving when I'm not looking. Because the worst part? I never found all the pieces of the alpha wolf after it shattered. And shadows can be very patient. The end. Skinwalker's Moon. The stage is set. I never wanted to believe in the old stories my grandmother used to tell me. Stories of dark magic, shapeshifters, and ancient curses. But after what happened at Mesa Verde last summer, I don't have much choice anymore. Some nights, when the moon is full and the desert wind howls through the ancient cliff dwellings, I can still hear their screams. My name is Robert Running Bear, though most folks around here just call me Wolf. I've been a ranger at Mesa Verde National Park for the past 8 years, ever since I quit the police force and finally got sober. The isolation suited me just fine. Up until 3 months ago, the scariest things I had to deal with were lost hikers and the occasional mountain lion. That all changed the day Dr. Sarah Martinez's archaeology team went missing. It was the hottest June anyone could remember. The drought had turned the park into a dust bowl, and the wind kept kicking up storms that painted everything in shades of red and brown. I was making my morning rounds when I got the call on my radio. The team of 6 archaeologists hadn't checked in for their daily report, and no one had seen them since the previous afternoon. Probably just lost cell signal, I told myself, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I'd been feeling it for days, a heaviness in the air, like the moment before a massive storm breaks. Drove my Jeep out to their dig site near the Cliff Palace ruins. The team had been excavating a newly discovered chamber that seemed to predate the main structures. What I found there made my blood run cold. Their equipment was scattered everywhere, like they'd left in a hurry. Half-filled water bottles, abandoned. Tools and notebooks lying open to pages filled with hurried scribbles. But it was what I found inside the chamber that really shook me. Bones. Not ancient ones either. These were fresh, arranged in a pattern I recognized from my grandmother's teachings. A pattern that hadn't been used in hundreds of years. A skinwalker's mark. As I stood there, the wind picked up, and I noticed something in the dust at my feet. Footprints. But they were wrong, backward, as if someone had been walking heel first. My hand started shaking as I reached for my radio. That's when I heard it. Not quite human, not quite animal. A sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the growing dust storm. There, just at the edge of the light, I saw eyes reflecting back at me. Not animal eyes, not human eyes either. Something in between, and they were watching me. I'd spent years running from my heritage, drowning the old knowledge in whiskey and trying to forget everything my grandmother taught me about the dark things that roam these lands. But standing there with those impossible eyes staring back at me, I realized I couldn't run anymore. The missing archaeology team was just the beginning. Something ancient had awakened in Mesa Verde, something that had been waiting a very long time, and somehow I knew I was the only one who could stop it. If only I'd known then what that would cost me. The wind was picking up now, and with it came a sound like laughter. Or maybe screaming. I clutched the sobriety medallion I always carried in my pocket. 8 years clean marked on its surface. and made a choice that would change everything. I stepped into the darkness, following those backward footprints into a nightmare I never wanted to believe in. The sun was setting behind me, and ahead, the first stars were appearing in the sky. It was going to be a long night, and somewhere above, the moon was growing full. I spent that first night searching until my flashlight batteries started to die. No sign of Dr. Martinez or her team, just more of those backward footprints that seemed to lead nowhere. The wind kept getting stronger, throwing dust in my face and making weird shadows dance across the cliff walls. Back at my ranger station, I called in Park Service search and rescue. While waiting for them, I dug out the old journal my grandmother had given me years ago. Its pages were yellow and worn, filled with stories and warnings I'd tried so hard to forget. "You can't run from who you are forever, little wolf," she used to tell me. Now, flipping through those pages, I wished I'd listened better. The search team arrived at dawn, 4 rangers and 2 local police officers. Among them was Jenny Thompson, a ranger I'd worked with for years. "What aren't you telling us, Wolf?" she asked as we geared up. Jenny always could read me too well. I started to give her the usual line about mountain lions or getting lost, but then I saw something that made my mouth go dry. There, scratched into the dust on my truck's window, was a symbol, the same one I'd just been reading about in my grandmother's journal. A warning mark. "Jenny," I said slowly, "I need you to trust me. Something's very wrong here." We split into teams. Jenny came with me back to the dig site while the others spread out to search the surrounding areas. The morning sun made everything look almost normal, but that feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. The dig site looked different in daylight. The chamber entrance gaped like an open mouth, and now I could see markings around it that the archaeology team had uncovered. They weren't ancestral Puebloan designs. These were older, darker. "Look at this," Jenny called out. She was holding one of Dr. Martinez's notebooks. The last entry was strange. "Found something in the back chamber. RB keeps saying we need to stop digging. The symbols match nothing in our records. The air feels wrong down there. That howling isn't the wind. RB, that would be Rachel Blackwood, the team's expert on native artifacts. She'd tried to warn them. Inside the chamber, we found more bones arranged in new patterns. Fresh scratches marked the walls, and the air smelled like wet earth and something else. Something that reminded me of the medicine bags my grandmother used to make. That's when we heard it, a voice calling for help, echoing from deeper. "In the ruins? Hello?" Jenny reached for her radio. "Wait!" I grabbed her arm. Something wasn't right. The voice, it sounded like Dr. Martinez, but also not like her. Like someone wearing her voice like an ill-fitting coat. "Wolf? What's wrong?" Before I could answer, the ground trembled. Dust and small rocks showered down from the ceiling, and in that dust I saw something that made my heart stop. A shape moving like a person, but wrong. All angles bent the wrong way. Jenny saw it too. She drew her gun, hands steady, but face pale. "Wolf," she whispered. "What are we dealing with? Here?" The shape disappeared into the shadows, and with it went the voice. But now there were new sounds, scratching, sliding noises coming from all around us. The air grew thick with dust, and through it, I caught glimpses of more shapes moving in ways that shouldn't be possible. My hand found the sobriety medallion in my pocket again. 8 years sober, and for the first time since I quit drinking, I wished I had something stronger than coffee in my system. But I needed my head clear, because now I knew the skinwalkers hadn't just taken the archaeology team. They were hunting us, too. A low growl echoed through the chamber. Not animal, not human. Jenny's flashlight beam caught something moving in the corner. For just a second, I saw a face I recognized, Dr. Martinez, but her eyes were wrong and her smile was full of too many teeth. "We need to get out of here," I said, backing toward the entrance. "Now." But as we turned to leave, we found our way blocked. There, arranged on the ground in front of the exit, was a new pattern of bones, and written in the dust beside them were words in Navajo, words that made my blood run cold. "Welcome home, little wolf." The skinwalkers hadn't just been waiting for anyone. They'd been waiting for me. Jenny and I barely made it back to the ranger station. The whole way there, shadows seemed to follow us, darting between the rocks and trees. My hands were shaking so bad I could hardly hold the steering wheel. "You need to tell me what's going on," Jenny said. She hadn't put her gun away. "The real story, Wolf, all of it." I looked at my watch, 6 hours since we'd started searching and no sign of the other search teams. They weren't answering their radios anymore. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. In the station's small kitchen, I reached for the coffee pot, but my hand froze halfway there. 8 years sober, but right now, the old urge was screaming at me. A drink would make this easier. A drink would help me forget those eyes in the darkness. Instead, I grabbed my grandmother's journal and showed Jenny the page I'd been reading. "There's a prophecy," I said, "about a time when the skinwalkers would return to claim what was theirs. They need someone with the old blood, someone like me, to complete their ritual." "Skinwalkers?" Jenny's voice was quiet. "Like the stories?" "Not stories. I've known they were real since I was a kid. It's why I started drinking in the first place, trying to forget." The radio crackled to life, making us both jump. Through the static, we heard a voice. "Officer Mike Chen from the search team. Found something. Cave behind the waterfall. Need backup." Then screaming. The radio went dead. My hands were steady now. Sometimes fear burns away everything, else even addiction. I checked my gun and grabbed extra flashlight batteries. "You don't have to come," I told Jenny. She checked her own gun. "Like hell I don't." The sun was setting as we drove to the waterfall. The dust storms were getting worse, turning the sky a sickly orange. We found Mike's police car empty, his radio lying in the dirt. The waterfall was barely a trickle thanks to the drought, revealing a dark cave opening behind it. More backward footprints led inside. "Look," Jenny pointed at the cave wall. Someone had scratched marks into the rock, counting days. 13 marks. The archaeology team had been held here. Deep in the cave, we found them. Not the people, but what was left. Clothes, backpacks, personal items. And a journal, its pages stained with dirt and something darker. It was Rachel Blackwood's diary. The last entry made my hands shake. "They're changing us. Every night, a little more." Running Bear was right. We should have left this place alone. "If anyone finds this, tell Wolf I'm sorry. The prophecy is real. They need him to complete the circle. Don't let them." The rest was unreadable. A sound echoed through the cave. Footsteps, but wrong, like someone walking on their hands. Jenny's flashlight caught movement ahead. A figure stepped into the beam. It was Rachel Blackwood, but not Rachel anymore. Her body bent at impossible angles, and her face was trying to be something else. "Welcome, little wolf," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "We've been waiting so long." More shapes moved in the darkness behind her. The rest of the team, all changed, all wrong. "Run." I shoved Jenny toward the exit, but the shapes were faster, moving like spiders across the walls and ceiling. Something grabbed my leg. Looking down, I saw a hand, but the fingers were too long, the joints bent backward. Dr. Martinez's wedding ring glinted on one twisted finger. I fired my gun at the cave ceiling. The noise was deafening. Rocks fell, blocking the deeper cave. Through the dust and chaos, Jenny and I ran. Behind us, inhuman voices laughed. They weren't trying to stop us. They were letting us go, because they knew. The change had already started. Back at the station, I looked in the mirror. My eyes looked different. And when I turned my head just for a second, my reflection moved a little too slowly. The moon was rising, almost full now. 3 days until it reached its peak. 3 days to stop whatever was happening. 3 days before I became one of them. Jenny watched me from across the room, her hand near her gun. "What do we do now?" I opened my grandmother's journal to the last page where a single line was written in shaking hand. "Only the oldest magic can fight the oldest evil." "Now," I said, feeling the change burning under my skin, "we fight back." The biggest dust storm anyone had ever seen hit Mesa Verde that night. The wind howled like a living thing, throwing sand and debris against the ranger station windows. But I knew it wasn't really the wind making those sounds. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I looked in the mirror, my face seemed a little different. Sometimes, when I wasn't thinking about it, my fingers would bend in ways they shouldn't. Your eyes, Jenny said quietly. They're changing color. She was right. The brown was fading to a weird yellow gold, like wolf eyes. The name my colleagues had given me years ago didn't seem like a joke anymore. I tried calling for help, but the phones were dead. The radio only played static and strange whispers. We were alone. Tell me about the oldest magic, Jenny said, pointing to my grandmother's journal. She was trying to stay calm, but I could see how scared she was. She hadn't slept in 24 hours. My grandmother said there's power in the old ceremonies, I explained, flipping through the worn pages. The skinwalkers use dark magic, but there's good magic too. Protection magic, but it has a price. What price? Before I could answer, something hit the window hard enough to crack the glass. Not branches or rocks. A hand. A twisted, wrong-looking hand with too many joints. They were outside. All of them. Dr. Martinez, Rachel, the whole team, their shadows moved across the windows, their bodies twisted into impossible shapes. Little wolf, they called in voices that weren't quite human. Anymore. Come join your family. The worst part of me wanted to. Jenny grabbed my arm. Wolf, you're changing. Your hands... I looked down. My fingers were longer, the joints starting to turn. The change was happening faster now. We need to get to... The ancient Kiva, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. The ceremonial chamber in the cliff dwellings. That's where the good magic is strongest. Through that? Jenny pointed at the storm outside. It was so thick with dust we couldn't see more than a few feet past the windows. I nodded. We don't have a choice. We made a run for my truck. The wind hit us like a wall and the dust stung our eyes. Dark shapes moved through the storm around us, getting closer. The truck wouldn't start. Run, I shouted. The cliff dwellings were half a mile away. In this storm, it might as well have been 100 miles. We ran anyway. The shapes in the storm followed us, sometimes looking like people, sometimes like animals, always wrong. Their footprints appeared in the dust behind us, each one backward. My body felt strange, like my bones were trying to rearrange themselves. The urge to let the change happen was getting stronger. It would be so easy to give in, to become like them. Jenny's scream snapped me back. One of them had her, Rachel, or what used to be Rachel. Her body twisted like a snake, wrapping around Jenny. I grabbed my medallion, 8 years sober, and remembered my grandmother's words. Strength isn't in what you can do, but in what you choose not to do. The words of the protection ceremony came back to me, words I thought I'd forgotten. I started chanting them, my voice rough against the howling wind. Rachel's grip on Jenny loosened. The shapes in the storm backed away, just a little. The Kiva. I pointed to the cliff dwellings ahead. We're almost there. That's when the ground started shaking. The whole cliff face trembled. Rocks began to fall, first small ones, then boulders. The ancient dwellings were collapsing. Jenny grabbed my hand, my twisted, changing hand, and pulled me forward. Don't you dare give up now. We ran through the falling rocks as the cliff dwellings crumbled around us. The skinwalkers' screams mixed with the storm and the sound of falling stone. The Kiva entrance was right there, just a few feet away. Through the dust and chaos, I could see the old symbols glowing with a faint blue light. My legs weren't working right anymore. The change was almost complete. Jenny half carried me toward the entrance. Behind us, the skinwalkers were closing in. Ahead, the cliff dwellings were falling apart. And somewhere above, through the storm clouds, the moon was almost full. We had one chance to get this right. One chance to stop the change. One chance to save what was left of my humanity. If we could. Just reach the Kiva in time. We reached the Kiva just as my legs gave out. My whole body burned with the change, bones shifting under my skin. Jenny dragged me inside the ancient ceremonial chamber as rocks crashed down around us. The kiva was exactly as my grandmother described. A round room dug into the earth with a small fire pit in the center. Old symbols covered the walls, glowing with that strange blue light. "Wolf," Jenny's voice seemed far away. "Tell me what to do." I could barely speak. My face felt wrong, stretching into something else. But I forced the words out, remembering my grandmother's teachings. "The symbols," I gasped. "Touch them in the right order, like in the journal." Jenny fumbled with my grandmother's journal, now worn and dirty from our escape. Outside, the storm raged and the skinwalkers screamed. "Hurry," I whispered. My hands weren't hands anymore. Claws scratched against the stone floor. Jenny ran from symbol to symbol, touching them in sequence. Each one flared brighter as she touched it. The blue light filled the room. Then Rachel's twisted form slithered through the falling rocks at the entrance. Behind her, the others came. Dr. Martinez, Mike Chen, all of them changed into horrible shapes that shouldn't exist. "Too late, little wolf," Rachel's voice echoed strangely. "The moon is full, the change cannot be stopped." She was right. I could feel the moonlight even underground, pulling at my bones, reshaping me. The urge to give in was almost overwhelming. That's when I saw it. My sobriety medallion had fallen from my pocket. 8 years clean. 8 years of choosing not to give in, one day at a time. Somehow I pushed myself up. My body screamed in protest, caught between human and something else. But I stood. "Jenny," I said, my voice rough and animal-like. "Finish the sequence, last symbol." "No!" Rachel lunged forward, her body bending in impossible ways. I met her halfway. We crashed together as Jenny slapped her hand against the final symbol, blue. Light exploded through the kiva. The whole chamber hummed with power. The oldest magic, the good magic. I felt it surge through me like lightning. The skinwalkers screamed, their twisted bodies writhing in the light. I saw them changing back, Rachel's form straightening, Dr. Martinez's face becoming human again. But the magic had a price. My grandmother's. Words echoed in my mind. The oldest magic demands balance. Something given for something taken. As the others changed back to human, I felt my own change becoming permanent. Not into something horrible like the skinwalkers wanted, but into something else. Something between. When the light faded, the storm was gone. Through the broken entrance of the kiva, I could see stars in a clear sky. The archaeology team lay, unconscious but human again. All except Rachel. She hadn't survived the change back. "Wolf?" Jenny's voice shook. Are you okay?" I looked at my hands. They weren't quite human anymore, but they weren't monstrous either. I could feel the wolf in me now, but it wasn't trying to take over. We were balanced, human and animal both. "I'll never be the same," I said quietly, "but I'm still me." The moon rose over Mesa Verde, full and bright. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of it. The old magic had worked. The skinwalker's curse was broken. But every full moon after that, I would change. Not into something evil, but into something that could protect this place. A guardian. They declared the dig site off limits after that. The official report said it was because of structural instability. Jenny helped me cover up what really happened. The archaeology team recovered but remembered nothing, or said they didn't. I still work as a ranger at Mesa Verde. Most days I'm almost normal, but when the moon is full, I patrol the cliffs in a different form. The tourists sometimes spot me and take blurry photos of what they think is a wolf. My grandmother's journal sits on my desk now. I've added my own stories to it, writing down the truth for those who might need it later. Some nights I can hear things moving in the darkness beyond the cliffs, but they don't come closer. They know I'm watching. I kept my sobriety medallion, added some new ones too. Turns out fighting the wolf inside me isn't so different from fighting the addiction. It's all about choices, one day at a time. And on full moon nights, when I run through the desert under the stars, I remember what my grandmother told me. Sometimes the thing you fear most becomes the thing that saves you. I am Robert Wolf running. Bear, I am both hunter and protector, and this is my home.